Good morning, everyone. So it's been a couple days since I've been able to make any videos whatsoever. I'm just really feeling it lately, and it's been a crazy busy week with us at the doctor constantly. So I wanted to kind of get in here and make a video why the kids are still asleep for the most part of these grow lights and the system we're kind of using right now, because we had to start small. We don't have a huge amount of money to just come in here and invest in grow lights all at one time. So it needed to be a process where we could slowly add to our growing system, slowly add trays, slowly add heat mats and grow lights and plants and work it that way. Now, because we don't have a lot of space, I figured we would start the plants that would grow out the earliest first. And for me, that is my squash plants, because these only need it to be 70 degrees to be safe outdoors. And it will quickly become that mid to end March without any protection whatsoever. It goes from winter to basically summer with like 2 weeks of spring in between here. So by May, we'll be reaching 90 plus degree weather on a daily basis. Right now, we have weather whereas yesterday it was 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the day, and today it's in the 70s again. So our weather is constantly fluctuating. It's just how it works. And even if in the morning it's in the 50s or 60s, by midday it's well into the 70s here. And we don't have a ton of protection from trees within our yard, so our raised beds, they stay significantly warmer than the in-ground garden. And I think that's at least a 10-degree difference minimum, which can be tricky during summer, but in this part of the year where it's still cool and we want to start warmer season crops, it's really helpful and it's nice. So these are some of the different squash varieties that we started. Now, if you'll notice, they've gotten so large so quickly after we put in these grow lights, because they came right as the squash were starting to germinate. These larger squash were. And so it was really perfect timing. Now, one thing that I'm going to have to do is kind of spread these out a bit, because I was going to put more seedlings here since we have the space. But the issue is that while we have the space to hold the pots, the plants need more space because they are growing very quickly, and I'm quite impressed. So if you look here, the only thing that'll get tricky is that I went ahead and labeled which squash come where and how many days they are. So for my Zepner squash, they're in these yellow containers, and you can see that. Now, I could have easily put one per container, and actually I only should have put 3 plants per container, so I'm not sure why this one has 6 sprouts, unless I really messed up. I know that some plants have multiple seeds inside of them, but squash is not one of them that I know of. So it's kind of crazy that I really messed up, and it looks like this one I double planted, and you can see I plant one in the middle and one on each side, and I did that twice. So that's an issue for me. This one's going to have to be separated once the plants are a little bit sturdier. I don't want to do it right this second, but you can see how I planted 3 per each one, not sure if they would germinate, and every plant in every pot absolutely germinated, which is pretty intense. Now, you can see down here, those are the roots of some of these plants, and I didn't think the roots would be doing that well so far, but they are, and they're coming all the way out here, which is insane. And look at this, even the small one, it's just growing through already. So these have some huge roots. That one's also a Zepner squash. And the Zepner squash are a really cool squash. They're a yellow zucchini, and then at the end is a really bright green. So that's going to be absolutely gorgeous. Man, I must have planted a lot of Zepner and not realized it. Can you tell I was excited about those? So this one's our Cozell squash, and man, look at the roots. Man, I just ripped a bunch of roots off too. Let's see that. Look at that. That just came off of this plant. So that's intense. I'm going to have to get these out really soon. I did not expect them to do that and grow so much so quickly. So it's pretty insane how well that they are doing and how fast they're growing. Well, this one actually looks a little sad. It's incredibly dry. So it must not be getting the water that the other ones are getting. And you can see how dry the soil is compared to these that are nice and moist and have a lot of moisture in it. And the issue is that these are kind of where the water will trickle down to, and then this one's in the middle towards the end, so it's not getting the exact amount of water that everything else is. Look at this one. It's getting shaded out by all of the bigger plants. I might actually have to go get an entirely new tray because, wow, I can't believe how big these roots are. That's pretty intense. I'm trying to separate them out, but they're just so many and they're so large and the root systems are already huge. One thing that we've talked about and kind of budgeted for is going to Johnny Seeds and getting some covering to protect our plants. It is a bit pricey just if you don't have a ton of money to spend on your garden supplies right now, but for about $100 you can cover 50 to 100 feet easily with the wire hoops and the fabric. And if you're willing to bend your own wire, that can also save some money. So it's definitely something that needs to be budgeted for. It's not something that a lot of people can handle doing all at once. And we didn't. We started kind of working in the yard, adding little trees and plants when we moved in. That was 7 years ago this August. So when I say that we've been slowly adding, I mean we've been slowly adding. This shelf is a shelf that we've had for over a decade that we've been using. Guys, I'm a big advocate of use what you can, upgrade over time, but you know, when you know better and you can afford to do better, then you do. But that's not the case. A lot of families don't have the option just to go out and invest hundreds of dollars in seed starting supplies and thousands of dollars in gardening supplies, and we're one of them. That's another reason why we really enjoy kind of a permaculture style gardening, growing multiple crops together and using that space underneath our larger crops, using space around the house and making it functional and also beautiful, because for one, it makes us feel good to see a beautiful space where we're growing our own food and we can just go outside and pick it, and it gives us a reason to go outside and get involved. I know that you're not necessarily going to save money in the beginning with gardening. Over time, you will absolutely save money, especially when you start buying your own seeds and doing your own thing. It's not going to be an immediate thing where you're saving money. You have to invest a bit. You have to kind of spend your time. That's the biggest investment right there. But for me, it's absolutely worth it. And then when you start saving seeds and your soil has been improved and you can use that, and we plant into the clay soil. Even our raised beds have open bottoms, so it improves the texture of the clay over time. That was the whole point of this, so that we're not forever having to install raised beds for the rest of the time that we're living here. We can install a raised bed and improve the soil and then plant into the clay. And many of our berry plants, they are all planted into our clay soil, including our blueberries, and then improved with microlife and mushroom compost and other different wood chips and things like that, which break down and create soil. And again, that's a process that takes time. It took us a year for the first batch to break down. It was not immediate. So that's something to consider, to be patient. And how much patience do you have in order to grow these things? Because you can do it, but I'm telling you, time is going to be your biggest thing. You're going to have to be patient, and that can be rough. Now, these are my lettuce plants, and you can see they're kind of wild. They're laying over everywhere. They're lean sideways, and that's because these are those really leggy plants that I started growing before I realized I desperately needed grow lights. And you can see some of them have 4 leaves and such, but they don't have the crazy root system quite like the plants up top too, not quite like the squash. They do have root systems. You can see some of the roots right there. And that's how I water them. I just put water in this tray and call it a day. So you can see a little bit of root systems sticking out. But they don't have really large extensive root systems yet. I would have liked them to be kind of straight up into the air. Some of them are fragile. And I caught our little booger cat over here eating some of the lettuce a couple of days ago, which is actually kind of funny, but still. So the lettuce, I'm not going to use a heat mat on. They are a cool living plant. In our house right now, where these are located, it's easily 7 degrees because it's not far from the propane heater that we use to heat this half of our house. And so it's easily 70 and sometimes higher. It's also why, even though there is a heat mat under here that we recently purchased under all of these squash plants, which I'm knocking over now, it's not plugged in at all and has never been plugged in because right here it's over 70 degrees. And yes, squash can use heat mats between 70 and 90 degrees and be okay. They are heat-loving plants. What I don't want to do is give them a high temperature right now and then move them outside where it's cooler and they go into shock. They're already going to go into shock a little bit because we are transplanting them, and I know that some people will be like, hey, you can't transplant squash. You can transplant squash, but you are going to have to baby them for at least, I'd say, about the first week from my experience. And take care of them. You're all going to have to do weird things where you space them out funny and everything else because they'll grow so rapidly. And see, we planted several seeds in a couple of pots. This one we didn't, but then we did. And so now we're going to have to separate those out if we can't put them outside in time, which is also okay. You just have to be careful and gentle. They can get a little bit of transplant shock, but the biggest thing is just making sure that they have the nutrition that they need. Like, as fast as these are growing, we are going to have to give them some kind of nutrition before they are planted outside because they're growing all they can right now. They are going to run out of food while in these pots. So that's really something to consider. Plants like to eat. They're heavy feeders. They're really no different than people. So in order to keep them growing, you have to make sure that they are not suffering from malnutrition. And you can tell these aren't. There aren't any crazy colored leaves. There aren't any yellowing. Only one of them is growing a little funny, and that's this one here. But it was on the edge of the lights for a while, so I think that had a little bit to do with it. And that's normal. Out of all these plants we're growing, to only have one that looks a little funny, it's fine. I'm not the least bit worried about that. And I also get some questions about how I grow things. I don't spray. I don't use any kind of dangerous chemicals, really, I guess you could say. And so that's something to consider too. And until this season, wherein I purchased some calcium and potassium from Whispering Willow Farms, I haven't actually used any other fertilizers besides Microlife. I've mostly been using Microlife and letting my soil break down over time, letting the additives, the wood chips, the mushroom compost break down. So I can't always grow in it the first season. Maybe I can plant my blackberries and they grow well and then that breaks down for them. But things like squash and stuff that take a lot of energy, I can't always grow that with them the first season. Sometimes I have to wait and the first season grow lettuce or turnips or even carrots. Carrots are a great option if you do not have a lot of really well amended rich soil. They love poor soil. In fact, overly rich soil will cause them to fork out and look really funny, whereas poor soil, they can kind of maintain their shape and grow straight down and get those nice carrots that you like. And carrots are one of my favorite things to grow to break up soil in the beginning. And the place where these are going previously had carrots growing there, which is kind of funny. Okay, so here's our seed mat, this is kind of how it turned on. It just plugs into a regular, so there you can put it on low, medium, or high. And then it just clicks back off, so you know it's off because it makes that clicking sound. But like I said, where I have this situated, it's already 70 plus degrees, so there's absolutely no point in putting on the seat mat for these plants. Now, when I start my tomatoes, which I haven't started yet, but when I do start them, for that, I'll turn on the heat mat because it'll get closer to the temperature where it's warm outside. I won't be putting them outside till it's consistently about 80 degrees. And that'll give it plenty of time to grow well. Now, tomatoes do not grow as quickly as the squash, but if they even grow half as fast, no issue. A couple of weeks, they'll be big enough to go outside. So that's pretty exciting. And here is the information. It's the Suncor S3. This heat mat cost me about $16, including shipping, tax, everything. I did just buy it off of Amazon. And I can't tell you how I like it because I haven't turned it on and used it. I can tell you that the book that came with it is pretty interesting. Here's the model number. Now, a lot of their products, it turns out, they're actually made for growing hemp. So, they have a lot of equipment. So, if you're growing plants that need a dome or anything else on them, they need high humidity, they actually have several products that can help you out. That's great for prairie seed starting water plants, hemp if you're into that. I mean, there are just so many options for growth, and I think that's really cool. So that is definitely something to consider, especially if you're growing inside. Now, those products rack up pretty quickly, so if you're looking to keep costs down, I'd start out slow. We bought one seed mat to try it out. There's no point in investing your money in tons of equipment if you don't even know that you like it yet because you just bought it. So we bought 2 grow lights when they were on sale. We got those from Harbor Freight, and they were usually a little more expensive. I got both of them, including tax, plus the money to ship them from my house from Houston, and that cost me about $50. The lights themselves, they carry in store, and they were on sale for $20 a piece. And the cool thing is that they all connect. So here's the part where the light is. It kind of has a switch under here where I can just turn it off and on. And here for the lights, which is really cool. They're about 2 feet long. And then if you come around to this side, it has a connection where you can connect the other grow lights together. So about 10 of them can connect safely together. And the other one is connected to this one. So it kind of saves you some plug space when you connect them all together, which is really cool. I love this grow light. I got 2 of them to try out because they were on sale, and it's something that I could actually afford at the time. And so I put these trays here. Well, to be honest, I was actually at the doctor when all this happened. My husband set this up for me, and I came home to it. I was pretty excited about it. So he put, you can see where he zip tied the plug over there, and he kind of zip tied these to the top of the shelves, and then was able to put the plants on it. Now, I could fit more plants on here, but they won't be able to kind of fit in the trays. And the issue is that if I try to turn my tray this way, a lot of the plants are not getting light at one time. So something I have considered, because I do have several of these plants, because I bought them about a year and a half ago off of Bootstrap Farmer. It may be pushing closer to 2 years, honestly. And, that's a lumpy plant of all of them. And it seems like the plants in the back aren't getting the light and water that they need compared to the other plants. So I might have to start turning it over a bit. Here, let's go ahead and do that. But I thought about just filling up a few of these trays because I still have about 10 that I'm not even using. And I thought about filling up a few of them and putting them into the shelf and just halfway full. That way the whole thing is getting light on the back side. Of course, with my cat liking to harass my plants, they may get dumped out. That is something I worry about, the cat or kids running by. Now this one, the seed leaves look a little funny, but seed leaves generally fall off anyways. However, in this case, they grew into these big leaves, so it just kind of depends on the plant that you have. And yeah, super floppy. Wow. So those back squash definitely are getting shaded out and not getting the water they need. So what I'm going to do, because these are really dry, this is what was on the very back up against the wall. I'm going to go ahead and water these, and I think that's going to make a really big difference. And they'll, over the next couple hours, kind of prop back up again. So I had to go get my daughter and move her to the kitchen. So while I was there, I went ahead and grabbed some water, and it looks like one of the kids used my watering jug for some kind of chocolate milk during the middle of the night, which is funny. Kids. So this is actually a watering jug. There are milk that you can buy from H-E-B, which is a Texas grocery store. And they have these glass bottles, so you have to pay whatever the milk costs plus $2, because you can technically return this to the store and get your $2 deposit back. We never do because we like the bottles, and you can use them for anything. Flowering pots, they're great for capping again and using for your own milks or juices or anything you want. In this case, watering plants. Now, the reason that I'm top watering some of these is because yeah, you can see they're so dry that they're droopy, which means they haven't gotten sufficient watering the last few times I've watered. And that's probably because they're in the very, very, very back. And you can see the extra water just goes right down into the bottom. And the other plants will get to drink that. So now I just pour the water into the bottom. Just like that. And all the plants will soak it up. And realistically, the plant roots will soak it up, but water naturally kind of moves through soil, where the dry soil will wick up water until it is moist enough, and then it'll stop for the most part if it has the opportunity. Now, if there's a ton of water and the soil gets oversaturated and there's no place to go, things can get really ugly pretty quickly, and that's an issue that we deal with during the wettest seasons of the year, and it's a good reason why I built some of the raised beds where I built them. If you look at my outside garden, which I'll show you, but not today, it actually has some beds that are really high and some that are much lower to the ground and used only like 2x4s. And those are around the already established beds. And what happened there is not only do those areas not flood, but the soil was already starting to get amended because of the larger beds and the soil seeping out of it over time. So that makes a big difference. And now you're not going to see these miraculously pop up again, because it will take time for them to kind of absorb the water and pop back up. But it won't be a ton of time. And oh, this one may actually have a break in it from being that way for far too long. This one doesn't, but if you look right here, there's a tear in it. Now, this is a squash plant, so the upside is that even though there's a little break right there, squash are known to create little hair-like fibers that turn into roots just like tomatoes. And that means that with this particular plant, all I have to do is bury it and it will be fine. Now, I may have to pot it up in order to bury it, or actually, the better thing would to pot up the other ones in here and not leave that one be. Let's hope that works. It may not, but when my squash plants outside, when they get tears or breaks or they have squash bug damage, what I do is I just continuously bury the part that's no longer producing fruit, and that becomes an elongated rootstock for my plant and will continue to make little roots, just like tomatoes do when you plant them deeper. And so these squash plants, if you can see, they actually have fine little hairs all over them, just like certain plants you would think of, maybe let's see, tomato plants, tomatillos. That's a big one for us that we like to up pot again and again, and it can. So any plant like that you're thinking of, these are very similar, and they will continue to produce roots if you bury them, which is really cool. That's not the case for all bush and vining plants, but even bush type squash kind of vine out a little bit, just not as intensely as a full-on vining squash. And most of these, in fact, all of these, I actually think are bush type squashes. So that makes life a lot easier for me. And I also labeled, like I showed you before, what type of squash they were, and I wrote on some of the pots too. It made it easier. So you can kind of see. And there it is. I think, look at this, actually this little leaf is starting to change colors. It's getting some red on it, which some plants tend to do. And this is the first time I've grown this particular type of lettuce. And actually there's another leaf getting some red on it, which happens. They may actually be a little warm. So, and that's why they're changing colors a little bit. It really is getting close to time to transplant these lettuce. It's just that the legginess is so bad, and they're not filling up their root pots quite as much as I would like them to. So I don't know how these are gonna do. I really was hoping that I could save them, and some of them, they look great, but some of them, it's a really questionable system there, for sure. I may have gotten distracted earlier because, you know, my daughter needed me. And so this is what I mean by they're kind of zip tied up to the top and connected to the top of the shelf and then go down to the plug. It just kind of keeps the wires from going haywire and everywhere. Now, you don't absolutely have to do that. It made it a lot easier for my husband when he was setting up this tray, and therefore it makes it a lot easier on me to have it kind of already done, which makes it a lot easier overall. Now, this is in my living room. It's not in any special area of the house protected. It is right in the middle of my living room. It's the space that we have. And on the other side of my living room is where I keep my incubator. So my living room is not your typical suburban living room. It has basically been transformed into, I don't know, another area for my homestead. Just kind of like homestead overflow here. We don't have the outbuildings we need to put things outside. We don't have a greenhouse yet. We don't have these things. And I'm not even sure that we'll have a greenhouse within the next year or two. That's not something that we've had a chance to really add into our budget. It's not something that we've talked about in great detail. Now, we've dreamed about having a high tunnel in our yard and where to put it and everything else. We've kind of said, oh, it would be nice to have a greenhouse, but we actually haven't made any plans whatsoever. So this is kind of how it goes. And then this very top shelf is just a nightmare waiting to happen. Like, you see our Ziploc bags from some of the different projects we have. Here are the garden rocks that the kids painted a couple weeks ago. Here are our cups, one of the kids' paintings, which is actually really cool. And these are onions, and this is the container that I was just watering my plants with. And then these are our onion starts, which I'll show you. They're up here, and they've already kind of started sprouting, some of them. Some haven't, so this little white one has started. So I paid, let me see, $4.50 at these for the feed store. And it's a little over a pound because, not quite a pound and a half, because it was $3 a pound. And that gave us well over 150 little onion starts to go put in the ground, which is really nice. And I didn't have to go far because I was already at the feed store. So if you have a local feed store, that may actually be something to consider, because you could be like us and find seeds significantly cheaper than you could at a local store or ordering it online. However, these onions aren't even your typical seed, because onion seed is a really tiny black seed, where these are actually onions that were started last season and then took out to kind of cure and be shelf stable, and then when you replant them, it'll technically bulb because it's considered a second season plant. Onions are kind of biennials. The first year they produce they kind of grow and produce a bulb, and the next year they produce seed. But if you're in a hot place like we are in Texas, the first year you plant them into the ground, it could be cold in the fall, and then all of a sudden you have 2 weeks of 80-degree weather in the middle of winter, and suddenly your onions are producing seed because they think that it's an entirely new year and new spring, and onion growing can be difficult here. So, big shout out to all of our Texas farmers who grow onions. You guys are amazing because it can get wild really quick if you're a home onion grower and you don't really have the knowledge of where to plant and how to protect onions and keeping them from going to seed, and it can get wild, and I don't have the knowledge on onion growing to really tell you the best way to do it. I'm still learning myself. So most of our bulb onions, they had rotted in the past because I hadn't put them in beds that were elevated above the wet ground, and we had a drought for 5 years. Then all of a sudden we realized where water was held in our yard. So we mostly ate them as green onions. That is going to be something that we are going to video as we learn, but yeah, we're definitely learning. That is definitely a learning process for us. So I know I said I wasn't going to show our garden bed up front. Now this is just one of many, but I figured if you made it through 30 minutes of just listening me go on and on about my grow lights and plant system without a ton of pretty visuals, then you definitely deserve to see this. So this triangular area right here, you can see the large raised bed above it. Now those weren't originally the plan. What happened was I bought a bunch of wood from Lowe's for building a huge shelf for all of our stuff inside my living room, and when the shelves got here, the wood, I had it delivered from Lowe's, so I didn't see it when I bought it, and it was just kind of messed up. There were a lot of huge gouges and gashes, and it wasn't great for the house. Now it was untreated wood, so it's not going to last forever, but it did kind of give us an established bed, and over time we won't need it to last forever because we'll have pathways and everything else. So we built this very large L-shaped bed, and I mean it's huge because the shelves were supposed to be an 8-foot tall shelf that covered a 14-foot long wall and had several shelves, so if you can imagine. And then out of an old fence that my father threw away, he had these little boards, and we connected them all together and created this triangular bed, which actually my oldest child uses to grow his plants that he picked out from H-E-B, and that would include these chives, which are starting to bloom, which we use a lot more than onions. And you can see where last season, all throughout spring and summer, he grew this basil, and these are the seed pods still attached to it. Some marjoram growing down there, and some lemon thyme right over here growing, and all of these will come back except for the basil. That plant is a perennial, but it's very delicate. So if you live in an area that has Mediterranean climates, or you live in zone 10 or 11 USDA zones, those are going to stay. You could probably grow basil all year round. We cannot. We can grow it about 10 months out of the year, and it can't just quite make it through the freezing weather that we occasionally get. So this plant is dead, but a bunch of little basil plants will pop up where the seeds fell, and that's really cool. And then these are some of the chive plants that made us think that ordering a packet of 100,000 chive plants from Johnny Seeds was a great idea, and we're hopefully have chives for life after that. Who knows? And then next to it, you can see I've started planting some of my blackberry cuttings, and that'll kind of give a really cool structure, but also give us a lot more blackberries. And look at that, one of the chives already opening up. How cool is that? And then this area, you can see this is our German thyme, which is actually supposed to be a zone 8 plant, but we're 9A and it's doing well. cilantro that we didn't plant this year. It just popped back up from the previous years. And then a ton of other plants. You can see in here some carrots are coming up. We have a lot of other plants. These are all actually daisies and buttercups, arugula that's popping up everywhere. So you can kind of see bee balm, and then down next to it we have our carrots and even turnips all growing together. Next to our rose bush we have some basil, and look at that, spinach popping up all below the rose bush, and even our first tea rose of the spring season. Look at that. That's our peach tea rose plant. That's the picture that you see whenever you open our YouTube right there. That's us. Our carrots. So you can kind of see what I mean by our plants inside will be planted in these established beds. And these beds are actually going on their second year. In March it will be 2 years. So it was definitely an overtime thing to establish them. But all these plants are plants that now just pop back up. So you can see just how well they're doing. And so all of our plants inside will go in there, and then we use mulch to mulch the pathways. And no, this has been a subject before within my own family, so I wanted to kind of clarify for everyone else. And I'll actually probably make a shorter video with just that information because it's that important to me. Even though we don't have grass in these areas, there are a lot of root systems from the trees and from grasses and other plants here that are perennials, and their roots are a lot larger and they grow a lot deeper. So for example, this rootstock here is a perennial plant, and it'll shoot back up in spring, and the roots are absolutely massive, and you can kind of see all this, and they will take over this entire area. So what you don't see is under all this mulch are giant roots from these perennial plants, and that is actually going to do a lot better job at keeping erosion at bay than a couple inches of grass on the surface. Grass is actually, this particular grass is a non-native invasive species that doesn't really help with erosion control because it's on the surface. So if that grass dies, that's it. Erosion is going to be your worst enemy. Whereas if this grass dies and there are tons of other plants with much better root systems growing, then you're doing okay. Look, you can see all of these baby plants popping up. I didn't plant these. These all fell from the 2 original plants that I planted right here of this fennel. And this is not the seed fennel. This is Florence fennel, which is a bulb. And they produce all of these babies over time. This one's still growing, and it produced this baby and this baby. So that's what I mean by all of my plants inside will be kind of coming to this established garden where all of this is growing, and it's really cool. We kind of mix annuals and perennials together, but for the most part, our perennials drop seed, and so do our annuals, so they come back even without us seeding sometimes, which is really cool. And that's kind of what happened with this Florence fennel. It just reseeds itself, and we will even leave some of these turnips, like this is a turnip randomly here, and it will be left. Look at that little bulb. And all these greens. Now you know I have so many turnip greens, and also why, yes, some of the leaves have holes in them, but I'm not concerned about a couple of leaves that don't look perfect. Real food is not perfect, guys. Food that grows, it's just not, you know, and I'm okay with that. I don't need my food to be perfect as long as it's healthy and it brings us joy. Nothing else really matters. So I appreciate you if you stuck around with me this long to kind of listen to me go on, and then step outside and see a little bit of our garden with us, which now that spring is arriving and things are warming up, you'll see a lot more of us in the garden and outside, and not just focusing solely on the waterfowl and little plants inside. But thank you guys for kind of sticking around with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you're actually learning something during this little rant over all of my inside growing and how I'm going to transplant them outside into what area. So hope you guys have a great day.